You ever see someone who looks like they've lived through more storms than a map could hold, and yet they walk like they're still carrying one? That was Frank Delaney. To most folks in Willow Pines, Frank was a ghost of the past. 79 years old. Ex-military, supposedly, though no one could say what branch. He lived at the edge of town in a sagging ranch house with peeling paint, a dog-eared American flag, and a rickety front porch where he'd sit for hours sipping black coffee and staring down the road like he was waiting for something to return. But on a grey Friday evening, Frank wasn't at home. He was behind the wheel of his 1967 Dodge D200, rusted, loud, and with a stubborn exhaust that coughed like it had secrets. Rain slicked the highway as he approached the private entrance to Greystone Hills, a gated HOA community that had become infamous for its self-appointed community patrol force, better known to locals as the HOA Cops. They weren't real law enforcement, but they acted like they were. And tonight, they had set up a makeshift checkpoint under the guise of entry audits. Reflective cones, floodlights, radios, clipboards, and 3 middle-aged men in matching black vests labeled community enforcement. Frank slowed down, eyes flicking to the small metal case on the passenger seat. A steel rectangle with scuffed corners, a leather strap holding it shut, and a latch that hadn't been opened in decades. He tightened his grip on the wheel as one of the HOA enforcers stepped into view and held up a gloved hand. "Evening, sir," the man said, stepping up to the driver's window. He was built like a gym teacher who never left high school, stiff posture, power complex, and a pair of aviators despite the rain. "Need you to confirm your resident ID and pop the trunk for a routine inspection." Frank stared at him, said nothing. The rain pinked softly against the windshield. "I said, I don't live here," Frank interrupted. That hung in the air like a bad echo. The officer frowned. "Then you're trespassing on private HOA property, which gives us the right to detain and inspect your vehicle. Step out of the truck." Frank didn't move. Instead, he calmly handed over his driver's license and a well-worn veteran's ID from the glove box. The man snatched them, looked them over, and then glanced at the metal case. "What's in the box?" he asked, trying to sound casual but leaning in a little too eagerly. Frank didn't answer right away. "It's not for you," he said at last. "It's going to the bureau." That did it. Another officer approached, younger but twitchier. "Sir, you're refusing inspection. That's obstruction. Step out now or we'll call the county." Frank unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped into the rain without a word. His boots hit the pavement with a wet smack. He looked calm, too calm. "Hands on the hood." He complied. The officers moved in. One cuffed him while the other popped the passenger door and retrieved the metal case. "You got a warrant for that?" Frank asked quietly, eyes never leaving the road. The officer scoffed. "We don't need one. This is HOA jurisdiction." They loaded Frank into the back of one of their security SUVs. The back seat smelled like fast food and cheap hand sanitizer. The door shut with a sharp thud. Frank leaned back against the vinyl, rain trickling from his jacket onto the seat. He didn't speak, didn't struggle, just stared ahead like he'd seen this moment coming for years. Inside the HOA security station, a glorified repurposed model home, they processed him like a common trespasser, took his photo with a dusty Polaroid, logged his license, and dropped the case into a locked cabinet labeled property, to be inventoried. But when the HOA's records clerk, a woman named Doreen who'd been filing petty complaints for 20 years, tried to enter Frank's name into their outdated system, something strange happened. The screen froze, then flickered. Then, for a moment, a black window appeared with one line of glowing red text: "Secure subject. Await federal response. Do not question." And just like that, the air in the room changed. Doreen backed away from the keyboard slowly, her face pale. She looked at the HOA commander, a man named Randall Scott, a former mall cop with a chip on his shoulder and a laminated operations director badge clipped to his chest. We've got a situation. Randall frowned. What kind of situation? The kind I don't get paid enough for, Doreen whispered. In the holding room. Frank Delaney sat perfectly still on a metal bench bolted to the wall. His hands rested in his lap. His breathing was steady. The rain outside had turned to a soft mist. He was waiting, and the HOA had just poked something far bigger than they could understand. You could hear the hum of the air conditioner in the walls when it happened. That's how quiet it had gotten inside the Greystone Hills HOA Operations Center. Doreen stared at the terminal like it had just hissed at her. She slowly took her hands off the keyboard and stepped away from the desk. Her mouth slightly open. Randall, she said again. Voice flatter now. You need to see this. The self-appointed head of HOA enforcement, Randall Scott, was halfway through microwaving a frozen burrito when he stormed in. What now? Doreen? Another expired lawn gnome license? She pointed at the screen. The flickering interface had stabilized. But the message remained burned into view. Warning emoji, secure individual. Do not question. Await federal response. Below it, a string of numbers and an unrecognizable agency code pulsed faintly. Randall squinted. What the hell is that? HOA software doesn't have that kind of override. That's not our system, Doreen whispered. It tunneled in through the ID verification software. I think we just hit something federal. Randall scoffed. You saying that old man's in witness protection or something? Randall, she snapped. I've worked in HOA admin for 20 years. I've seen everything from backyard goats to naked neighbor feuds. But I've never, ever, seen a hard lockdown order come from an encrypted federal channel. Just then, Officer Bryce, one of Randall's HOA cadets, stepped in, holding the old man's wallet. He's a vet. Vietnam era. Got an ID from Fort Carson. And this. He held up a small metal tag. This isn't normal. It's military. But I can't even read the barcode. No rank. No branch. Randall looked at it. Then back at the screen. The hairs on the back of his neck started to rise. In the corner, another cadet named Jansen mumbled. So, we arrested some kind of federal asset? No one answered. Outside the locked holding room, Frank Delaney sat quietly, the cuffs still on his wrists. He hadn't spoken since the moment he was booked. The security camera feed showed him calm, unmoving, like a stone in a river that had seen 1,000 storms flow past. Inside the office, Bryce leaned closer to Randall. Boss, we might have screwed up. Randall tried to puff himself up, to reassert control. Okay. Nobody panics. We just log it. Hold him. Wait for county sheriff backup. They'll know what to do. Doreen shook her head. Didn't you hear me? That alert didn't say wait for sheriff. It said federal. And it used override protocol. That means someone out there already knows what we did, and they're on their way. There was a beat of silence. And then, as if on cue, the building's landline rang. One shrill ring, then another. No one moved. Doreen picked it up on the third. Greystone Hills HOA enforcement, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The voice on the other end was male. Calm. Measured. With an edge of command so sharp it felt like a scalpel. Do not speak. Do not transfer. Do not disconnect. The voice said. Doreen's throat tightened. Confirm you have detained one Frank Delaney. She looked at Randall, who nodded rigidly. Confirmed, she whispered. The voice continued. You are to cease all contact with the subject. You are not to question him. You are not to open or tamper with the object recovered from his vehicle. Federal responses inbound. ETA, 28 minutes. Secure premises. Is that understood? Yes. Doreen breathed. Click. She stood there holding the phone like it had turned to stone in her hand. Jansen was the first to break the silence. 28 minutes until what? Outside, the rain had picked up again, tapping against the office windows like impatient fingers. The fluorescent lights buzzed above as tension crackled through the air. Randall swallowed hard. Lock the damn case. Double secure it. Jansen, get away from the holding door. Nobody goes near that man. But what do we tell him? Bryce asked. Randall turned toward the holding cell feed. Frank hadn't moved an inch. You don't tell him anything, Randall muttered. You let him wait. Meanwhile, inside the small cement cell, Frank finally leaned back against the wall. For the first time since his arrest, a faint, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't just expected this. He'd planned for it. You know that sinking feeling when every instinct in your body screams, you messed with the wrong guy? That's exactly what swept through the Greystone Hills HOA enforcement office at 9:17 p.m. when the first set of headlights broke through the mist just beyond the cul-de-sac. Officer Jensen, still rattled, glanced up from the security feed. Ah, boss? We got incoming. Randall Scott stepped toward the window, still trying to pretend he was in control. But as soon as he saw the vehicles, the bravado drained from his face. 6 SUVs, unmarked, matte black, moving in a tight, perfectly synchronized formation. They didn't rush. They didn't rev. They didn't need sirens. Their very silence was louder than anything else that night. They weren't from the sheriff's department. They weren't from the county. They were federal. Randall's lips parted, but no words came out. The SUVs came to a smooth, simultaneous stop in front of the HOA building. Doors opened in eerie unison. And then, they stepped out. Agents, men and women dressed in tailored dark suits, with earpieces coiled discreetly into their collars. Not one of them looked surprised. Not one of them looked around. They knew where they were, who they were dealing with, and what they had come for. One woman led the formation. Mid-40s. Efficient. No umbrella. Just a badge in one hand and a folder in the other. Her heels clicked on the wet pavement as she approached the door with sharp precision. Inside, panic had taken root. Jansen whispered. Should we let them in? No, Randall said automatically. Then Doreen stood. You idiot. Of course we let them in. This isn't a neighborhood board meeting, they're from Washington. Before Randall could argue, the front door creaked open. The woman stepped inside, scanned the room like she had X-ray vision, and spoke in a tone that silenced everyone instantly. I'm Special Agent Dana Clark, Federal Bureau of Investigation. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction. Where is the detainee and the object removed from his vehicle? Silence. Bryce raised his hand shakily. Back holding room. The object's in the evidence locker. Second cabinet. Top shelf. Agent Clark turned to one of her colleagues. Retrieve it. Don't open it. The agent nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Randall tried to reassert control. Now. Hold on. This is a private HOA security center. I need to know what's... Clark didn't even glance at him. Mr. Scott, you're the one who signed off on the detainment of Frank Delaney? Randall straightened. We had reason to believe he was concealing potentially hazardous materials. Clark pulled a folded document from her folder, handed it to him with a calmness that felt like a warning. Frank Delaney is classified as a Tier 2 protected federal asset under Executive Order 3461A. You were not authorized to question, search, or detain him. Randall blinked. I didn't know. Clark raised an eyebrow. And yet, you did it anyway. Bryce muttered under his breath. We're so fired. Agent Clark moved down the hallway without another word, heels echoing across the tile floor. The rest of the agents followed in silence, like shadows that knew where they belonged. In the holding room, Frank Delaney was already standing. His posture was perfect. His hands were folded behind his back. He nodded once as Clark entered. Mr. Delaney, she said softly, we've come for the case. It's about time, he replied. No anger. No bitterness. Just a quiet truth. She signaled the other agent, who arrived a moment later holding the metal case wrapped in a thick protective cloth. We'll transport it immediately, she said. What about them? Frank asked, glancing toward the hallway. Clark didn't even look back. They'll be briefed. As she turned to lead him out, Frank paused at the doorway. Through the small square window, He looked into the office where just an hour ago he'd been cuffed and mocked. Most of the HOA officers were now standing, silent, unsure whether to salute, apologize, or disappear through the floor. Clark placed a hand lightly on Frank's shoulder. "Let's go." And just like that, the man they thought was a harmless old neighbor walked out of their custody under federal escort, without a single question answered. But one thing was now certain: they hadn't just arrested a man. They'd stumbled into something far, far above their HOA pay grade. The conference room at the back of the HOA office had never seen anything more exciting than an annual landscaping budget discussion. Until tonight. Now, it was silent, except for the soft click of the latches unlocking on the steel case Frank Delaney had carried like a secret for half a century. Special Agent Dana Clark wore gloves as she slowly lifted the lid. A few of the HOA officers stood near the door, unsure whether they were allowed to witness what was happening, but too paralyzed by curiosity to walk away. Inside the case, a stack of aged, yellowing files bound with faded red twine, several sealed envelopes marked eyes only, classified, a small velvet pouch holding an unmarked flash drive, and at the very bottom, something no one had expected, a black, rectangular object the size of a paperback book, smooth, silent, and cold. Its only marking, a serial number etched so faintly it was nearly invisible. Agent Clark's face tightened as she saw it. "This is it," she said under her breath. "This confirms it." "Confirms what?" Randall asked from the back of the room, arms folded, trying to salvage what little authority he had left. Clark looked up, not at him, but at Frank. "You want to tell them?" she asked gently. Frank nodded. He stepped forward, slow and now, each step deliberate. He rested one hand on the edge of the case and looked around the room. "You ever hear of Operation Ember Watch?" he asked, voice steady. Blank stares. Doreen frowned. "Is that like a spy thing?" Frank smiled faintly. "Something like that." He took a breath. Back in 1973, a joint task unit was formed, off the books, off the radar. Not military, not CIA, not FBI. A blend of all three. Our job was simple: identify, intercept, and neutralize high-level intelligence threats during the Cold War. We weren't uniforms. We were ghosts. Clark nodded silently beside him. Ember Watch wasn't just a mission, Frank continued. It was a project designed to gather intelligence so sensitive it wasn't even entered into official archives. We were sent into places no one talks about. We watched movements, intercepted transmissions, sometimes stopped things before they ever started. He reached into the case and picked up one of the old photographs. It showed 6 men, standing in front of what looked like a hangar, all wearing plain clothes. One of them was Frank, decades younger, eyes sharper, jaw clenched like someone who knew secrets he could never share. "That's us," he said, passing it to Agent Clark. "Only 2 of us left, me and Langston. He passed away 3 months ago." He tapped the topmost envelope gently. "Before he died, he told me it was time. Said the clearance window had been reactivated. Our job wasn't done until someone knew the truth." Clark added, "This device, along with the contents of this case, proves that Operation Ember Watch was not only real, it succeeded in preventing a classified nuclear escalation in 1976. The incident was buried by both governments. The device here recorded the last comms between operatives before the deactivation of the mission." Frank closed the case slowly. "I kept it locked away," he said. "Moved it every few years. Even changed the strap when the leather began to rot. Never opened it. Never peeked. Because I made a promise. To Langston. To the others." He looked at each person in the room, his eyes now weathered, but alive. "And now it's done." The room was still. You could hear the HVAC system kick on with a low hum. A few HOA officers, especially Bryce, stood frozen, eyes wide like they'd just seen something sacred. Doreen, quietly wiping her glasses, muttered, This was in our evidence locker." Frank turned toward her. And thank God it still is. Agent Clark stepped forward, sealing the case. We'll be transporting the contents directly to a federal secure archive. Mr. Delaney will be debriefed off-site. But he is not in any trouble. Quite the opposite. Randall, now visibly sweating, blurted out. So, he's like a hero? Frank let out a single, tired laugh. No, he said. Just a man who didn't break a promise. The black SUVs didn't peel out of the Greystone Hills HOA parking lot. They left in formation. No sirens. No loud engines. Just silent precision rolling away into the mist. Like shadows slipping back into the night. Frank Delaney didn't look back. And nobody tried to stop him. By the time the federal agents were gone, the so-called HOA cops were left standing in a broken circle of silence and disbelief. The evidence cabinet where the case had once been was now marked with federal tape. The conference room still smelled like wet shoes and stunned regret. And the self-styled Commander Randall Scott, he sat at his desk, staring at nothing. Later that week, everything changed. A formal inquiry was launched by the county. Once word got out that the HOA had detained a federally protected individual without authority, and worse, had tampered with private property containing classified documents, it was over. The HOA board was dissolved within days. Randall Scott and 2 others were permanently banned from any future association leadership roles. The phrase Community Enforcement Initiative was publicly denounced by the township. HOA policy was rewritten from the ground up under state oversight. But no charges were filed against Frank Delaney, because Frank had never broken a law. He'd only kept a promise. 1 week after the incident, on a Tuesday morning just after sunrise, the neighbors saw it again, that old Dodge T200, rumbling quietly down Ash Grove Lane. The same cracked mirror, same rattling exhaust, the same man in the driver's seat. Frank parked at the local corner store, stepped out in his work boots, and walked inside like it was just another day. No one asked about the case. No one asked about the FBI. But everyone looked. The cashier, new guy, college age, froze when he saw him. Sir. I mean, Mr. Delaney. Right? Frank just nodded. Picked up his usual, a loaf of bread, a tin of coffee, 2 cans of beans. Paid with exact change. Thanks, the cashier said awkwardly. And, thank you for whatever that was. Frank gave a small smile. Wasn't for me. And then he left. Back at home, his porch creaked the same way it always had. The dog-eared flag still fluttered above the steps. But now, as neighbors walked their dogs or watered their lawns, something had shifted. Where once they might have ignored him, now they waved. Some even nodded with a quiet respect. They didn't know the full story, but they knew enough to understand that the old man with the battered truck had done something real, something that went beyond HOA rules, beyond front lawns and mailbox heights. He had carried something for the country, and he had never once asked for thanks. That Sunday, just after lunch, a black sedan with federal plates pulled into his driveway. This time, only one person stepped out, a woman in plain clothes, holding a small wooden box with gloved hands. Frank opened the door before she knocked. No words were exchanged. She simply handed him the box. Inside was a folded flag, a signed letter from the bureau director, and a photo of a man in uniform, Langston, the last member of Frank's unit, his best friend. The letter read, "Your delivery made the truth possible. His name will not be forgotten. Neither will yours." Frank stood at the door for a moment longer, nodding once, then stepped back inside. He placed the box above his fireplace, never mentioned it to anyone, never pointed it out to visitors. But sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, he would glance at it while sipping coffee, back straight, eyes steady. And across the neighborhood, people began to speak his name differently. He wasn't just the strange old man with the Dodge. He was the man who stayed silent, for the right reasons. The man who kept his word when it mattered most. The man who, in the end, didn't need a title, or a medal, or a plaque on a wall. He just needed to finish what he started. And he did.